So for anyone who is calling in from home, I hope you know where your emergency exits are. For those of you in the room, if there is an emergency, try to avoid going through that door in the rear, as it brings you deeper into the hotel, and it's probably not going to be a good time. So use these doors here. So we have Bob Thompson and Michael LaPointe from the USDA, and they are going to give us a talk on the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service watershed operations. So Bob and Mike, it's all you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike LaPointe. I'm the EWP Program Manager for Vermont NRCS. Bob Thompson, who will follow me, is the State Conservation Engineer and in charge of our watershed programs in the state of Vermont. The emergency watershed protection is one of the portions that's covered under watershed programs for the NRCS. So the watershed program is made up of three main parts: the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, which provides technical and financial assistance to entities of state and local governments and tribes, project sponsors. You'll hear that word sponsors a lot. Basically, all the programs require a sponsor for planning and installing watershed projects. The Watershed Rehabilitation Program, or REHAB, offers financial and technical assistance to rehabilitate dams constructed through NRCS watershed programs. Bob will show you some slides on that. We've got 4 in Vermont down in the Ludlow area. Those are the only ones in Vermont that we did previously. This program extends the service life of dams to meet applicable safety and performance standards or decommission dams so they no longer pose a threat to life and property. A lot of the dams that have been installed by NRCS across the country have seen land develop below them, which has increased the threat level that they pose to property and life. And the portion that I'll concentrate on is the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. Safeguards life and property from floods, drought, and products of erosion on any watershed, whenever fire, flood, or any other natural occurrence is causing or has caused a sudden impairment in the watershed. For Vermont, historically, that has been either a flood event like Tropical Storm Irene, thunderstorms, or spring runoff, or even winter runoff from ice melt. You go out west where they have forest fires, the program kicks in for that to help reseed those areas that are denuded after a fire to reduce erosion. So a key part of the watershed program is the reduction of erosion that's going on. For more information, you can go to our national website. If you do a search for EWP or watershed programs in NRCS, they'll come up as one of the returns. So our Emergency Watershed Protection Program, basically its program is to undertake emergency measures, including the purchase of floodplain easement for the runoff, retardation, and soil erosion prevention. And that's key, that it's got to be part of what's being the benefit, is that we're reducing soil erosion. Safeguard life and property from floods and drought and the products of erosion on any watershed whenever fire, flood, or other natural occurrence is causing or has caused sudden impairment in the watershed. The EWP program is available to eligible local sponsors following a watershed event which caused an imminent threat. And a local sponsor is defined as a legal subdivision of state or tribal government. Eligible sponsors include cities, counties, towns, conservation districts, flood and water control districts, and any federally recognized Native American tribe or tribal organization. In the state of Vermont, historically, we have had cities and towns act as sponsors. Most other entities that would meet that requirement usually do not have the means for providing the matching fund of 25% for our projects. The EWP program has 2 avenues of assistance. The first is what's now known as EWP recovery, which is what will stabilize stream banks and excavate out filled in stream channels or remove debris from stream channels after a flood event. And the other one is what's known as the EWP FPE, or floodplain easement program. We're currently working on our first one in the state of Vermont. It's similar to the FEMA mitigation grants that buy properties that are historically getting damaged from floods, but it adds a component that we can actually do floodplain restoration projects in addition to buying the properties out. So EWP recovery, the recovery is available for threatened public and private property. And a key thing with the program is that we, like I said before, we have to work with a local sponsor. We can't work directly with private landowners. NRCS cannot work with private landowners. Sponsors must request assistance within 60 days of a watershed event which caused the imminent threat. So if you've got a storm that caused flooding, within 60 days of that, you have to submit a letter to NRCS requesting assistance to be eligible for the program. Instructions and a sample EWP assistant request letter are available on our website, and the address is below. If you search for Vermont NRCS, it'll come up as one of your results. EWP measures must reduce imminent threat to life and property and reduce erosion. Property is defined as any artificial structure permanently affixed to the land. So land itself is not eligible for EWP program assistance. Being the USDA, we typically work with farmers, and cropland isn't considered property for this program, so we can't assist with eroding cropland after an event. Eligible EWP measures for projects must be economically and environmentally defensible. We basically can't spend more than what we're protecting for the measure. Technically sound. EWP assistance cannot be used for the repair, rebuild, or maintain private and public transportation facilities or utilities, repair, rebuild, or replace damaged property. So if you have a town road and the town road is damaged and can't be driven on, or a portion of it can't be driven on, that's not eligible for EWP. That would fall under FEMA. NRCS can reimburse up to 75% of the construction cost. Costs incurred prior to having an executed agreement are not eligible for reimbursement. And this is a key difference between FEMA and NRCS. With FEMA, they will reimburse towns typically for rebuilding roads that have washed out after an event. NRCS cannot. We have to have an executed grant agreement with a project sponsor before we can reimburse any cost incurred. Sponsor is responsible for the following: obtaining the land rights for the repairs, securing the necessary permits, furnishing the local cost share, which is 25% of the construction costs for recovery measures in the forms of either cash or in-kind services, accomplishing the installation of the work. Work can be done through federal contracts or locally led cooperative agreements, and conducting operation and maintenance on the completed projects. Typical types of locally led cooperative agreements are locally led, where the sponsor will solicit bids and award construction contracts, or force account, where the sponsor uses their own forces and equipment for the repair. In Vermont, we don't have a contracting officer, and we have not for probably 20 years. So we do not offer federal contracts for this type of work. The last time we did, I think, was in 1997. Emergency watershed protection. NRCS provides financial and technical assistance for the following activities under EWP program recovery: debris removal from stream channels, road culverts, and bridges, reshape and protect eroded stream banks, establish vegetative cover on critically eroding lands, repair levees and structures, and repair conservation practices. Financial assistance, or FA funds, are for construction expenses, and technical assistance, or TA funds, are for administrative, design, and inspection expenses. Vermont will provide a percentage of the funds of the project estimate if the sponsor wants to contract out or provide the design themselves. Any designs not done by NRCS have to have a Vermont PE stamp on them. We'll look at some examples. Is there an imminent threat to the life or property? And this, where do I point, Bob?
Yeah, click on that top.
So here the bank's eroded right up to the foundation, so there's definitely an imminent threat. Same thing here. The corner of the foundation is actually undermined. In this case, it wasn't really bad, and we just put gravel. It's a slab on grade, so we didn't worry about the building itself being damaged. But the landowner was made aware that they would probably have to put additional fill underneath that over time until it got recompacted. So both of those were what we'd consider an imminent threat to life or property. As I said before, repair must be economically and environmentally defensible and technically sound. So this is a before picture, and here's the project after completion. The distance we were able to fill out was set by the Agency of Natural Resource River Management engineer. Before and after. So we armored the bank to protect the house. Here's a road culvert. The bank's eroding, and we armored the bank to keep the road and culvert from washing out. Here's a before picture. Stream is flowing down this way. Is there an imminent threat to life or property? And the answer is no. There's a driveway here for this property that's already washed out. It's damaged, missing. We can't repair that. And also the building's over 80 feet from the damaged bank, so it's still not what we'd consider an imminent threat. There is a threat there, but it's not an immediate threat. The program's not meant to be that I have erosion on my banks and the government will reimburse 75% of the cost. It's meant to be that if something's not done now, we have another storm event in the watershed, I could lose my property. But looking downstream on this site, there's a town road and a town bridge. And yes, there is an imminent threat to this town bridge. And this was the repair that was put in. And the length of the repair was determined by where the armor could terminate at a stable section and not increase the threat to other properties. Debris removal. This was debris that was removed from the channel right upstream of this bridge during the event. And this was same stream. Basically a dam was created with debris that when water backs up, it directs all the flow into these houses over here. These are the few cases where we've actually done debris removal in Vermont. A lot of times the debris doesn't pose any kind of threat to any structure. It's hung up in the trees and it stays there. The state typically only allows us to cut them into smaller pieces if it's going to be a threat to the bridge or structure. We also do sediment removal from either channels or the floodplain to help restore capacity and reduce flooding. Here, this channel is completely filled in, and they actually sandbag during the event to keep some of the flow where the stream should be. Floodplain easement, we work with a sponsor just like our other program. We'll purchase property and land rights and remove the houses and other improvements within the floodway. And we'll implement a floodplain restoration project to restore floodplain functions and values to the natural conditions of the greater extent practicable. Contiguous properties can yield greater benefits, but it's not a, we can still do it if the overall we can show a benefit to the floodplain by buying out those properties. An RCS can determine land is ineligible if any of the following apply. Implementation of restoration practices would be futile due to on-site or off-site conditions, or land is subject to an existing easement or deed restriction that provides sufficient protection for a restoration of the floodplain functions and values. Purchase of the easement would not meet the floodplain easement program purposes. This is the only one FPE project we have in Vermont that's currently ongoing. We're still in the initial stages of it. So this is the Huntington River, and these properties get flooded considerably, and you also have Texas Hill Brook that comes in here. We're hoping it goes through. I think it's a nice addition to the FEMA mitigation funds that can help remove some of these properties that are in flood-prone areas that get damaged repeatedly over a period of time and restore some capacity, which will benefit the whole watershed in the long run. Any questions?
I hear nothing, so.
Ooh, hold on,
Hold
folks,
on,
we have one here in the room. Go ahead. I can repeat it so they can hear you.
Heaven forbid that it would happen, but for an event like Irene, where there's a whole bunch of debris and there's a whole bunch of flooding and everything going on, it sounds to me like the towns, cities, would need to have an agreement, be a sponsor already. But if he can explain a little bit more about what's the response capability of the NRCS,
Sure.
because we've got the Army Corps, we've got FEMA and so forth, but what could NRCS do in the case of a catastrophic situation? It sounds like it's going to take some time, you have a sponsor, and then what about funding? Is funding always available, or does that have to wait for an application? In other words, what's the timeline for NRCS to help in an event like that?
Okay. The question here from the room was, what are the response capabilities of the NRCS? And, you know, it's kind of the timeline of your ability to react.
So it's a good question, and it's got a lot of different parts to it. Unlike FEMA, we're not a first responder, but we respond as soon as we get a request from a sponsor for assistance following an event. We'll schedule the site visit to go look at the damage. Part of it, though, is depend on what's available at the national level for funding. When funds are available, the turnaround from when we submit an eligible site for funding to receive funding on our end is usually within a couple of weeks. Typically, the grant application takes longer than that. Usually, the slow process is getting a sponsor to submit the documents required to get into an EWP agreement. When they don't have the funds at the national level, they basically put the sites on a national wait list. And 2021, we had an event in July, and it went onto a wait list, and it was funded in December when Congress appropriated some funds. Those funds ran out around July, and new requests for funding across the country are now going on a national wait list again until Congress appropriates funds. Typically, our program gets funded when FEMA gets funding also. If one's going to get some funds for an event, typically they fund both programs. Like I said, our turnaround, we're supposed to have the work done within 220 days of an event for what we consider an emergency site. So the sites I showed before and after pictures, we would consider those emergency sites. But the reality is in Vermont, sometimes winter comes in and we can't work in the winter, so it pushes the timeline further. But it can go quicker if the sponsor's on the ball and submits the request and we get the funding right off. We've got a site from the request came in, I think it was in at the end of May or early June, and it's under construction right now. So there's a lot of factors that affect the timeline for Vermont, and one of them is the funding, whether it's available or not. With Irene, they had a little bit of funding. We received, I think, $500,000 right after the event that we used for some what we consider exigent sites. But the rest of the funding came in January when Congress appropriated funds. And so January 2012 is when the program got funded. So the bulk of the repairs that we did, and we did $1.6 million worth of repairs after Irene. I think we had 72 agreements. That means we worked with 60 plus sponsors in Southern Vermont after Irene. So out of those projects, we provided $1.6 million in relief to protect existing properties.
And one more question from the. I hope that answered your question.
No, that helps. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. So cities and towns should be encouraged, it sounds like, to become sponsors if they're able to do that, so that it would shorten the length of time for them to get help from NRCS. Am I correct?
No, it doesn't really shorten anything. Any town can submit it. And when I've worked with a sponsor, a town, I usually recommend if you get an event that causes any kind of runoff event that causes damage and you're not sure if it's eligible or not for the program, submit a letter and it gets NRCS on site and we look at it and see if it's eligible for the program. If it's eligible for the program, we submit it to our national office for funding. And if they approve the funding, it moves forward. The site from this past May was the only site, so it was a once event thing. It's not unlike FEMA that needs a national disaster declaration. Our program does not. Our agency in each state is run by what we call a state conservationist, and he or she has the ability to declare a local disaster. So the event in May for Vermont was declared a local disaster, and it was only one site, and it was approved for funding. So I always recommend a town that I've worked with, if you have an event that caused any kind of damage in the watershed, runoff type, and you have some questions, submit the request, and NRCS will come out and look at the damage and see if it's eligible for the program. So by submitting the letter, you're basically agreeing to be a sponsor, the request letter. But it doesn't obligate the town to move forward with the project. It only gets NRCS out to look at the damage.
Do you have a question?
Sort of, to follow with that, if there's funding available through FEMA or through Vermont Flood Resilient Communities Fund, does one funding mechanism override the other? Can they be used in conjunction? And would the USDA, this program's maybe like design or build or engineering capabilities qualify as like a project under a local emergency planning plan for the application purpose? Like, do they work together or are they completely independent?
Were you able to capture that question?
I some of it. And if anybody I don't answer their question, you're welcome to reach out to me and I'll respond in more detail. Typically, we can't piggyback with other federal funds with the program. As far as design-wise, with EWP Recovery, we provide design services for most of the projects, but sponsors can subcontract, or if they've got design staff on hand for like the larger communities that have design engineers, they could provide the designs themselves. And like I said, their designs need to be stamped by Vermont PE. For the floodplain easement for the restoration projects, we look at the sponsor to contract the design services, and we provide technical assistance funds to cover those costs. Typically, I won't say it's always 100%, but typically we reimburse technical assistance expenses at 100%. But if they exceed what we have available to put towards it, then yeah, obviously the amount would be less than 100%.
All right, that's all the questions we have here from the room.
Okay, Bob Thompson will be the next presenter.
all right.
Might want to turn your phone off.
Oh. Big change here. I just want to follow up with Mike a little bit. You know, he mentioned that one of the biggest frustrations is getting the sponsors to return paperwork. And we are a government organization. We have lots of paperwork, and you know, a lot of times we're waiting for paperwork to come back in order to process this. So the more proactive the sponsor is, the quicker the project will go. I really believe that. You know, and sometimes you know, the more proactive sponsors, won't hesitate to have an emergency meeting of the select board in order to move the project ahead a little quicker. So that's, like I said, that's probably the number one thing that delays us is that. So anyway, moving on. I thought this was a good opportunity. I'm guessing most towns are going to want to use EWP program, and we've worked with a lot of towns over the years with this program. Very good program. But I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about some of our other watershed programs a little bit. You know, Mike talked about this a little bit. You know, our watershed and flood prevention program. This is basically provides both technical and financial assistance to states and local governments to help plan and install a watershed project. Now I'll get into what a watershed project is more specifically here in a second. Dam rehab, the rehab program, basically it's the same program, except over the years since 1940, NRCS has built almost 12,000 nationwide dams. And imagine dating back to 1940, a lot of them have surpassed their design life. And so now we're using this program to go back and look at these dams and to rehabilitate them to replace deteriorating parts and to and to bring it up to standard. The standards have obviously changed. Climate's changed since the 1940s and 50s. It's an opportunity to do that, and we're putting federal funds into that. And then we already talked about the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. So dam rehab, fortunately or unfortunately, we have 4 dams in Vermont that were built by NRCS or Soil Conservation Service back in the 1960s and 70s. All 4 dams are in Ludlow, and they have all surpassed their design life. So the sponsor has asked us to look at these dams and to see what we need to do to rehabilitate them to bring them up to current standards. We completed an assessment of the 4 dams back in 2015, and basically it was just a snapshot of the dams just to give you an idea of how they're performing. And overall, the 4 dams are doing very, very well. There's no imminent danger of failure or anything yet, but there are some shortfalls, and they do need to be brought to current standards. In 2020, we started developing a supplemental watershed plan. This is next thing to an environmental impact statement. Not quite that, but if you're familiar with that is, it's very detailed environmental document to kind of guide us on what improvements we should do with these 4 dams. We started in 2020. And we've had some delays along the way, and we're hoping to get that completed this fall sometime. So we're working on that right now. And overall, doing the supplemental watershed plan on the 4 dams costs $1.4 million, and NRCS paid that totally. And then once we're done with that, then we want to move into the design phase of these 4 dams to design up the rehab. We're hoping to start that in 2023, and it's probably going to take us about 2 years to design that up for the 4 dams. And we're estimating it's going to cost about $4 million. And again, NRCS will pay for the design services 100%. NRCS in Vermont just does not have the engineering staff on board to do all that work, plus do our regular work as well. So once the design's done, then we hope to move forward with the construction. And again, right now we're looking at a total cost of $30 million. NRCS would pay $20 million of that, and the sponsor would be responsible for $10 million of it at this point. And again, for engineering oversight and quality assurance, NRCS would pay 100% of that. And we're estimating it's going to be about $3 million to provide that on-site oversight. And we're estimating it's going to take 2 years per dam in order to complete the work. So we're estimating it's going to take about 8 years to complete the construction. Other responsibilities for the town or for the sponsor, which Mike alluded to, the town's also responsible for the permits. They're responsible to purchase the land rights if that's necessary, and any operation and maintenance in order to maintain the dams is on the sponsor to do that. Like I said, Vermont, we only have 4 dams in Vermont that were built by the Soil Conservation Service. Here's the watershed. It's in Jewel Brook. It's just the town of Ludlow is just downstream of these. You got 4 dams here marked with the stars. And here's what they look like. We got number 1. They're very, very similar dams. They all have a pipe going through the embankment, plus a large auxiliary spillway going around the one side of the dam. So this is, again, they all very, very, very similar. So some of the improvements we're looking at to do with the dam rehab. One thing that came out is the auxiliary spillways are large, wide channeled earthen channels, and they're vegetated, and they're very vulnerable to erosion and possible breach. So one of the big things we have to do is we have to armor our auxiliary spillways. Other things, we got to add drain fill. We got to raise the dam on a few of them. We got to do some dredging. We got to repair. We got to repair some of the concrete structures and a few other things. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But overall, the dams are functioning well. We just need to make some improvements to bring it to current standards. So that brings me to the Watershed Flood Prevention Operations Program, which like I said, dam rehab is part of this program. It's just a subsection of it. This program has been around for a long, long time. This is the program that actually built these dams. Recently, in the last 20 so years, it kind of faded away. There were still some very few projects being done throughout the country, but it kind of went away. But it's now with the infrastructure bill and the inflation bill, we're getting a lot of money being flooded into these programs. So it's opportunities to improve watershed. To qualify, it needs to be a small watershed, which we define a small watershed, anything under 250,000 square acres or 250,000 acres. It must benefit at least 20% agriculture. Must be a rural area, and the rural area is defined as less than 50,000 people, which almost all of Vermont is considered a rural area. And you must have a sponsor, just like EWP. We have to have a sponsor. A town, a state, a municipality. Well, here we have conservation district, but unlike EWP, the sponsor for these programs needs to have the right of an eminent domain. So I'm not sure if a conservation district would work on this or not, but that's a distinct difference between watershed flood prevention and EWP. Projects must fit into one of the following purposes. It's erosion and sediment control, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a little bit what these all mean. Must be watershed protection, flood prevention. Over the years, probably flood prevention has been the #1 thing we've done that we've put this program for. Water quality improvements, rural, municipal, or industrial water supply, water management, fish and wildlife habitat enhancement, and hydropower can be part of this program. So looking at the time frame of these all 3 programs, EWP obviously is a much shorter program. It's an emergency program. It should be a much shorter program. Although with watershed, the watershed flood prevention operations and dam rehab, there's a lot more involved with it. There's a long planning process that's involved that kind of pushes it out. EWP, like Mike said, we had a site that the event happened in June, and they're out there doing construction now. You're not going to do that with watershed or rehab. You're going to have at least 5 years before you go to construction if you start now. So, and again, I talked about we're using the watershed approach to plan these, which can be a long, drawn-out process. And basically, the timeline we're looking at, you first, just like EWP, you have to request assistance. And then for the watershed flood prevention operations, the first thing we do, we're going to do a preliminary investigation and feasibility report. This basically determines whether the project we're looking at is eligible for the program, and if there's any huge obstacles that are going to prevent the implementation of the program. So we do that first. In fact, we just completed a couple for some potential projects, and the timeline's probably more like 3, maybe 4 months to do those as opposed to 6 months. And then we do a supplemental watershed plan and environmental document. That's that environmental impact statement. And again, we've been hiring this all out. We don't have the staff to do it, and it's going to take 2 years to do that. In fact, the one we're doing for the dam rehab is actually going into its 3rd year, believe it or not. So it does take a while for these projects. So if you're expecting to start construction on day one, it's not going to happen. Again, once the plan is done, then we got to do the design. We're estimating it's going to take 2 years to develop that, and based on the complexity of the project, it could take 2 years to build the project as well, to construct the project. So just to give you some examples of what we're looking at, it's a very flexible program. There's a huge number of things that we can do with it. Flood control, again, we do a lot of we've done a lot of flood control in the past. And then wetland restoration, it's anything that helped rehabilitate wildlife areas. Erosion and sediment control, when I first moved to Vermont in '95, we were doing some watershed projects, very much like our regular farm bill, although it's focused on a certain watershed, and it allows us to put more money toward it, implement things a little faster to try to control erosion and reduce sedimentation. This is a little deceiving, water-based recreation. Water-based recreation is not a primary purpose of this program, but if you're doing another purpose, such as flood control, you can piggyback some recreation on top of that to help and get some cost share to help with the recreation. Like if you want to put some boat ramps in, a picnic area or something like that, the program can help with that. Water quality improvements, very much like the erosion and sediment control. We can do a watershed program. Here they're putting in riparian areas to try to reduce erosion going into the stream. Water supply, out west, I think this is very big for water supply. That is another opportunity. I believe the cost share rates are different for water supply as opposed to flood control. Right now, it's estimated that we have in this program around 2,100 projects nationwide right now, and that's growing rapidly. And they say about approximately 60% of them are dams. So I just want to look real quick. Cape Cod, they're doing a project right now. I just wanted to give you an example of what we can do here, although we're not going to, this pertains to salt water, but we can do similar stuff in Vermont if you have a sponsor who is interested. But water quality is a big concern there. And they're putting in practices to try to collect water from parking lots and so on, and try to clean the water up before it goes into the ocean. And the big reason is they got a big bivalve aquaculture industry around Cape Cod, and they're trying to clean that up to make these areas more productive. Wildlife also here, obviously we're not going to be doing salt marsh restoration in Vermont, but there is an opportunity to do wetland restoration, anything to improve wildlife and things like that. Aquatic organism passage, here what they did is they had an old fish ladder and they replaced it with a more modern fish ladder, and just putting in fish ladders, period. So it just kind of gives you an idea of what we can do as far as the program. It's very flexible. There's a lot of things we can do with it. So again, I just wanted to bring that out as one thought was, if there are some areas that are very, very flood prone, that, maybe a possible longer term solution would be to put in some flood control dams, as opposed to going in every few years and repairing it. But anyway, I'll stop there and entertain any questions for Mike or myself. I must have put everybody to sleep.
Come on up. We have one in the room.
Is there a local cost share, like a local match requirement for your funding?
Is there a local cost share or a match required for your funding?
It depends on it. It gets kind of complicated, but with the dam rehab, it was a 65-25 deal. Depends upon what we're doing. I don't think there's a straight out cost share rate. It depends if you're doing flood control, it'll be different as opposed to water supply and so on and so forth. So I can't give you a straight answer exactly what the cost share rate is. EWP is definitely 75-25.
Doesn't look like there's any other questions from the room. If folks that are calling in have any questions, you please feel free.
Well, you have my email address there, and you have Mike's email address. By all means, don't hesitate to reach out to us. If we can't find the answer or we don't have the answer, we'll find it for you.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Have a great day.